Okay, this individual left a comment, and they start with the words, "Thanks, Dennis," which is nice. It's always good to be thanked. And they say, my A1C is down from 7 to 5.6 since February. Not sure when this was left. I think it was fairly recently. Mike the Meter was what did it for me. Getting immediate feedback on how my diet was affecting my glucose levels was a huge motivator and taught me what foods are safe for me. Well, he said it all in that one sentence. I mean, he just laid it out. The power of your glucose meter, which we affectionately call Mike the Meter, and no, he's not really alive, and his name's not really Mike. I mean, I guess if you want to call him that. But listen to what he says, getting immediate feedback. Highlight those words, immediate feedback. He says, on how my diet was affecting my glucose, it was a huge motivator, and it taught me what foods are safe for me. That's it. Motivation, number one. It's a huge motivator. It's so much better than having some YouTube guru like me or anybody else tell you, well, here's the right diet for you. Just get your glucose meter out. The reality is, if we were all wise enough and ambitious enough to test ourselves about an hour and 15 minutes after we finish eating every meal for about a month, you wouldn't have to do it for a lifetime, but for about a month, just eat a random selection of meals and foods and test yourself. We call it a post-meal test. Officials call it a postprandial test. If people would do that, they wouldn't even need guys like me or Jason Fung. They'd figure it out in a hurry. So he says immediate feedback. He said it was a huge motivator. And then secondly, he says it taught me. It's a teacher. Your glucose meter, folks, is a teacher. It will inform you about things. When we were kids, we went to school and we sat in desk and the teacher would go up to the chalkboard. I guess they still do that these days, and teach us things that we didn't know before. So by the time I was done with second grade, I knew about things that I didn't know the year before. I learned my multiplication facts. Well, I don't think it was second grade. It might have been third or fourth, but I learned about multiplication, learned about long division. And later on, I learned about algebra. I learned things I didn't know. Well, guess what? When it comes to diabetes, most people are ignorant. They know almost nothing. A lot of people, if the doctor just says, well, you've got an A1C of 10 or 11 or 12, they wouldn't even know if that's good or bad. The doctor, of course, will usually go on to say that it's not good, but they wouldn't know otherwise. Most people, now not everybody, some people with inquiring minds and do some research, they do know, but most people don't. And that's why the glucose meter is so invaluable. They just are so ignorant. And the neat thing is it doesn't take long. You start testing yourself a lot for a couple of months, you'll pretty well have it figured out which foods raise your blood sugar a lot, which ones raise it a medium amount, and which ones barely move it at all. Just don't move the needle. And what you will figure out is what I figured out and what millions of other diabetics have figured out, and that is that the more carbohydrates are in your meal, the more your blood sugar jumps up. And the less carbohydrates in your meal, the more it tends to just rise very gently and very little. So he says, it motivated me and it taught me. Exactly, my friend. That's what a glucose meter will do. It'll motivate you and teach you. Now, a CGM will do it normally even better if it's a fairly accurate one. And I mean, you can see what is my blood sugar at 45 minutes after eating. What is it at an hour and a half? What is it at 3 hours? Fantastic. And what I encourage people, if you can swing it at all, and most people can't afford to wear a CGM all the time, all year long, unless you've got insurance that pays for it. And the problem with the insurance is you start using that CGM and start figuring some things out, your blood sugar is going to take a nosedive. It's going to go down to normal pretty soon. And once it does that, your insurance probably won't pay for it anymore. But anyway, it will motivate you. It will teach you. Everybody ought to be given a blood sugar meter, a glucose meter. Everybody from about the age of 35 or so. Doctor ought to hand it to you, ought to teach you how to use it, ought to tell you what's good, what's bad. Anyway, the blood sugar meter did it. He says ramen noodle soup turned out to be really bad for me, and that surprised me. Well, that shows just how little he knew about foods and their effects and carbohydrates. Ramen noodle soup has got to be one of the worst foods you could eat. It's just pure carbs. There's almost no protein to it, and there's almost no fat to it. It's just pure carbs. To me, it's like saying, well, what a surprise. I ate a big chunk of bread and my blood sugar went up. Well, of course it did. Or it'd be like saying I drank a supersized Coca-Cola, full sugar, and my blood sugar rose. What a surprise. Well, no, it's not a surprise. But I'm not blaming this guy. I was just that way too. I was just as ignorant when I started out. I didn't know much. And I remember when I had my first salad that I tested after I ate, and my blood sugar just gently rose, something like 118 or so, and then went back down. And I thought, whoa, this salad isn't doing anything to my blood sugar. But there were other foods that did a lot, like bananas, and they had such a reputation for being healthy. I just assumed bananas have got to be the best thing in the world for you. I just assumed that. And that's the problem. We've heard so much about the, quote, health foods, such as fruit, such as, quote, healthy whole grains. And we just assume, we just take it for granted because people don't use glucose meters. And they just say, well, I've heard the term healthy whole grains, so I'm going to get me the darkest, brownest, nuttiest, crunchiest bread I can find on the grocery store shelves, and I will be good. And you go ahead and do that, but test your blood sugar about an hour and 15 minutes after you finish that brown, healthy, nutty, crunchy, whole grain bread. And you'll find out healthy whole grains aren't so healthy for diabetics or for pre-diabetics or for anybody else. We just were not made to eat carbs at the level we do. And sometimes we just assume some things are good when they are not. And that's why we test. People will always ask me, what about this diet? What about that diet? What about this food? Well, what about this YouTube expert that says it's okay to eat high-starch diets? Well, see what it does to your blood sugar. Maybe if you're 22 and you just get rid of the sugar and you eat all-starch diet, you may be able to get by with it for a while. But if you're middle-aged or more, and especially if you've got a bit of a paunch on you, a little bit more weight than you need, high-starch diet is a killer. High-starch diet is a monster. It's a nightmare for you. But you may have some young guy come up on YouTube and say, well, I eat all kinds of starches, and I'm fine. It didn't raise my blood sugar much. Well, maybe not. He may be slim and buff, muscular. And so for him, it may work just fine for a while. I don't think it's good for anybody over the long haul. So it's kind of amazing. But he says, I'm also doing 16-8 intermittent fasting or time-restricted eating. He says that makes it easier to control my total food intake. Yeah, it does. When you do the 16-8, or in my opinion, 18-6 is better. A 6-hour window of eating. Either eat a breakfast and a lunch and skip supper, or eat a lunch and a supper, dinner some people would call it, and skip breakfast, which is what I normally do. And it works perfect. And if you need a little something, have bulletproof coffee. If you say, well, I don't know if that would work for me, or I don't like coffee, you could eat like a single boiled egg, and that would pretty much work as a substitute for eating nothing at all. But just don't eat much at all, and better if you cannot eat anything or bulletproof coffee. I want to encourage you to join Benedict and me in our home through our new podcast, Discover the Word with Den and Ben. While you drive in your car, or while you walk or exercise at the gym, you can be learning the Bible through our low-key, user-friendly Bible studies. To get the information you need to listen to our Discover the Word with Den and Ben podcast, click on the link in the description.